Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to the show. Addressing infidelity in romantic relationships is always a daunting task. It's not one size fits all. Sometimes it's a one-off mistake and other times it's a pattern. And on top of that, unpleasant emotions like resentment and jealousy naturally arise in such situations. So today we are getting some expert advice on how to navigate these tough conversations and decisions from a very experienced psychologist, Dr. Fran Davis. She works primarily with individuals, couples, and families. Hi, Fran. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. How are you going?
I'm doing well. How are you, Marie?
Fine, thank you. So tell us a bit about your background and how you got into this.
Let's see. My background. I jokingly tell the couples that I work with that I started being a couples therapist when I was about 2.5
Two and a
years old.
half years
Yeah.
old?
Yes, I was probably more attuned than I should have been to conflicts between my parents and other issues in my family. So I was I've been a psychologist for a long time. I officially became a psychologist in my late 20s and started working first with individuals, but then got training in couples and family therapy. And then actually, as I've gotten older, it's been a bigger part of my practice. And then specifically these kind of marital issues that we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to you on the part of being a therapist to your parents. But how do you feel about that?
In hindsight, I don't think it is the best. It's not the best policy. I certainly don't coach the couples that I work with, and when I work with families, I really do try to protect children more from the marital challenges. So perhaps that was something that I learned because of what I experienced.
Yeah, that's a great lesson to learn. And I think as children, it's hard to perceive what's going on. So as adults, we definitely try and be more protective of the children we're looking after. So that's great to hear. Now, before we get started, we like to get to know you better as well. So this is Have You Met Dr. Fran Davis? I really like to know what your favorite book is, if you have one.
I thought about it in the context of this topic and thought I would recommend the book Family Happiness by Laurie Colwin.
What is it about?
It actually is a book about a woman who is having an extramarital affair, and she all her life has done everything right and been perfect, and then her life is upended and she has to make a decision about which way she's going to go.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story because a lot of the time when we think of infidelity or having an affair, we think of the person that would most likely have most likely do it. And to think about how a person who is so perfect that you wouldn't think they would commit infidelity and seeing them go through it and what their thought process is like would be very interesting. What about outside the context of this recording? What would your favorite book be?
Gosh, it's hard to pick a favorite book. I'll have to think about that one.
We can come back to that, actually.
Yeah, I love too many books.
Do you have a favorite film?
I thought about a recommendation that I wanted to make, and I love films, and I wanted to recommend a mini series, which
Ooh,
like a long film.
yeah, we don't mind that.
Okay, so A Small Light. I think it's on Hulu here,
Hmm.
and I can tell you a little bit about it.
Yes, please do.
It focuses on the Dutch resistance movement during World War II with a focus on Miep and Jan Gies, who Miep was primarily responsible for trying to protect the Anne Frank family. She worked for Otto Frank, and it's really wonderful. And I traveled in Amsterdam this summer, so I wanted to watch it before I went. And I did go to the Anne Frank house, and they recommended it there, and it's really quite wonderful.
That sounds fantastic. I've always wanted to visit Amsterdam, and I heard the tulip fields are spectacular as well. Do you listen to any podcasts?
I do. I really recently enjoyed listening to the Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Do you know who she
What
is?
is it? No.
It's called Wiser Than Me. She was. Do you get Seinfeld? Do you know Seinfeld?
I did watch a couple episodes, but I'm afraid I was born way too late for it.
Okay. Well, she was Elaine on Seinfeld, and then she did Veep. She did a lot of other shows. She's a comedian, and mostly a sitcom actress. But
What does
she
it talk about?
did a podcast interviewing famous women who are older than she is, like Jane
Ooh,
Fonda, and to learn. And she asked them questions about, what regrets do they have? What would they do differently? What are they proudest of? And
that's really
very
interesting.
good. Yeah.
I always love watching or reading any media that has something to do with women talking to women or women interacting with women and supporting each other. It's always very heartwarming. Uh,
Then you might
and
like it.
yeah, I think I would. Do you have a famous role model?
I would go with Margaret Atwood. She's the author of probably most famously Handmaid's Tale, but
So
she's also,
why specifically do you look up to her?
I love her writing. Those are some of my favorite books. I really do love Margaret Atwood books. And I think she, without veering into politics, unfortunately, she was rather prescient in seeing things. And she engages you in sort of a cautionary tale of how things can go.
There's nothing better than diving deep into just some really great storytelling. I know that. So, what's the last course you've completed?
I actually just took a class. You're talking about something that I studied.
Sure, we can go with that. Yes.
Yeah, I actually just did a summer class that was really outside of my normal zone, and it was fascinating and wonderful. It was a psychoanalytically oriented presenter. His name is Salman Akhtar, and he was talking about lifespan development, and it was fascinating.
So, what's the biggest takeaway you got from that course?
It actually caused me to, it was reinvigorating to the work that I do to bring, he's not strictly Freudian, but a psychoanalytic perspective to listening to my clients. And even I may infuse some of the things we talk about today with it because, while I don't necessarily pathologize all people who are perhaps unfaithful in their relationships, I think it is interesting to think about what people experienced in their family of origin and how that informs how they behave as adults.
That's really interesting. I do love a good, invigorating experience like the next person. Like I myself I went through something the start of this year that was very spiritually invigorating, and it just changed my perspective on so many things. So I can relate to you there.
Oh,
Now we're going.
you're gonna tell us what it is, Marie?
Uh, no, I just like met a stranger who just complimented my work and art so much more than anyone else ever had. And afterwards, I started thinking of myself like, oh, I guess some of my art could relate to some people, and it's worth putting out there, even if I might not have like a huge audience at the moment. Some people do see value in it, and so yeah, it's worth creating it still. Yeah.
I'm glad that happened for you.
Thank you. You're being a really good therapist right now, Fran.
I'm sitting in my therapy office being a good therapist. So yeah.
Now we'll move
What
on
I
to the interview.
okay.
First question that we like to ask all our guests, because it can be quite a broad question or term. What is a relationship to you? How would you describe a relationship?
When I read through your questions, I really thought, doesn't that go without saying? Um, I mean, mostly when we think about this topic of infidelity, you're thinking about intimate partnerships. I also do think there are emotional injuries that can happen in other type of relationships, but I guess and because I also do work with people who are polyamorous. So some relationships are not just two people, but generally we think of two people and the connection between them is
Yeah,
comprising their relationship.
that's a good, short, sweet answer, and I think it's very to the point. Uh, but in your opinion, does a relationship still mean the same thing now as it did, let's say, 10 years ago?
It seems to me, and there are some researchers who've looked at the history of marriage, that it only seems to become more and more important to people over time. Historically, I think there were obviously arranged marriages or duty marriages, and people didn't live as long. And I think there's a lot more hope and expectation and burden put on intimate relationships to
Right,
fulfill a lot of our needs.
right. Like, for example, now people might not be getting married as much, but they that's because the marriage means more, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And it
I don't
isn't.
know. I don't know what the statistics are in Australia for people getting married versus cohabitating.
What are they like where you are?
I don't have the data per se. It I've been going to a lot of weddings. I can tell you that. Certainly, there's been a lot of post-COVID pent up weddings. People are still getting married. Um, Certainly, people cohabitate and don't feel a need to get married. I have a daughter who lives in Europe, and it's a lot more common for people to not feel the need to have the government endorsement of the relationship to
Yeah.
feel commitment in that way. But
Yeah. I think, yeah, it's pretty much like a bit of a mix. I do have many friends who want to get married, and I also have many friends who don't and don't see a need to get married and
huh.
just never intend to get married. So, but I
But
think,
do they still hope to have an intimate partnership?
oh, yeah, for sure. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people that I know still hope for that. But I do think that it is pretty common here, at least in my circles, to not really have a plan for this intimacy and just find someone that you're comfortable with, and potentially it's not something that's exclusive. Yeah. But that's just my circles and that's just my experience because I think other people probably who run in other circles probably have different experiences as well. So I'm not speaking for everyone. Uh, so how would you define infidelity?
Well, again, if we think about intimate partnerships, I think there can be infidelity in other kinds of relationships because, generally speaking, people hold some set of expectations for the other person in the relationship.
Right.
And an intimate partnership, unless couples have negotiated what's now being called consensual non-monogamy or open relationships,
Or
there's a
ethical non-monogamy. I think
yeah,
that's the term.
yeah, ethical, or I think it's consensual
Yeah.
non-monogamy is one of the ways it's called here. Like we agree that it's okay to be with other people.
Yeah, I believe here it's ENM, ethical non-monogamy, if
Ethical
I'm not wrong.
non-monogamy,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Interesting. So, what does infidelity look like? Like, what's an example of it in non-romantic relationship versus a romantic relationship?
I mean, we probably wouldn't use the term infidelity, but I could think of family relationships where there was some understanding. I see it around, I don't know that I'd call it an infidelity. I would call it an attachment breach. You know, I see it in situations with, weddings and you didn't invite me to the wedding and I'm
Right.
hurt. I thought
Yeah.
our relationship was this way. You didn't invite me to your summer house, your vacation. You excluded me from something. I thought our relationship was one way and you behaved in another way.
Right.
You
Yeah.
didn't invite me to your birthday party. I don't do that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Something like it's almost like expectations.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a violation of the expectation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does infidelity affect relationships? What kind of impact would it make on, let's say, the daily lives of a couple?
I when I saw that question, I thought it really is important to go back and say that when an infidelity happens, when a breach happens in a relationship, and you may be surprised to know this, that it's kind of like in basketball, a jump ball, and you have no idea which way it's going to go. It's possible that the person who has betrayed in the partnership is desperate to repair. It happens that the person who's betrayed in the partnership either doesn't want to repair, wants to leave the relationship, or wants to carry on as if
Nothing
it wasn't a big
happened.
deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, you're making too much of this or something like that. It's possible that the person who was hurt is done with the relationship. It's possible that the person who was hurt is desperate to repair the relationship, and it's possible that the person who is hurt is willing to try to sweep things under the rug because they're so desperate for the relationship that they can't engage in the repair. I mean, of all those scenarios, I endeavor, when possible, to see if it's possible to have the relationship grow stronger because of what can be learned and what can be gained from
And
repairing an infidelity.
what is needed for that to be possible?
Well, first of all, you have to ascertain that both people want that. And as I
Right.
said, that is not a given.
Mhm.
Um,
Do you ever
so
get situations where both couples say that they agree to it. However, one of them might not necessarily actually want it, and they're just saying it because they think they do. But in reality, it doesn't work out because they really don't. Is that a thing that happens?
Oh, I've definitely seen that where there's some understanding, I'm doing air quotes,
Yeah.
that there is some openness in the relationship, but then the connection that's formed outside of the initial partnership somehow threatens the initial partnership. And
Yeah.
then you've got a situation where the person who stepped out said, I thought that was okay. And I've worked with a couple where that was the case. They thought they were separating and that it was okay to, one partner thought it was okay in the separation to see other people. And the other
Right,
partner,
like a Friends Rachel and Ross
yes, I
situation.
thought we were on a break.
Yeah. I thought we were on a break,
I
but I
thought we
mean,
were on a break. Exactly. It
oh,
totally.
okay, well,
I guess that made it across the
not
world.
to digress from the topic, but what's your stance on that?
What?
What's your stance on that, on Ross and Rachel?
Oh gosh, I can't even remember. I just remember I thought we were on a break. I can't even remember who cheated on who.
Well, essentially, Ross thought that Rachel was off with another guy when she wasn't. And so Rachel and Ross decided to go on a break for a night or something like that. And then Rachel felt awful because they had this whole argument and she didn't mean what she said. And during that night, when they were on a break, not a breakup, on a break, Ross decides to go and get drunk and slept with someone else. And when Rachel showed up at his apartment, apologizing for the fight and asking if they could get back together, Ross just hides the girl that he just had slept with and said, okay, let's get back together. And that's how that happened. And then when Rachel found out, obviously she was livid and they were like, no more. We are now broken up. And yeah,
That's right.
that's how it
It's coming
happens.
back to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was like a whole like running argument.
Yes. It
Were
was
they
it was an arc. It was a plot
Yeah,
arc in
yeah.
Friends for a while.
Were they or were they not on a break? Which I think is besides the question. I think that's not the question that should be asked. I think the question that should be asked is, did Ross cheat? Because they were on a break. That's definitely what happened. That's what they
Well,
said.
I would be willing to engage in discussing my opinions about Ross and Rachel in that, because if they came to me as a couple,
Yeah.
um, the whole, and obviously it's a trope that I know, like we were on a break, doesn't address that Rachel felt hurt.
Right.
She had a different understanding, and arguing with her about the technicalities. I mean, it's fair to say, if I'm Ross, I really thought that meant something. And I took it in a direction that in hindsight, I really wish I hadn't. And I can understand how incredibly hurtful that is to you. And I love you. And I really want to work. I see you as my life partner and I really want to work this out because you mean everything to me. I've always loved you. I mean, and it's not just a one-time thing. There are ways to repair injuries.
Yeah, you see,
And
I feel like if people
arguing about, it wasn't really bad because I had a different understanding is never going to repair an injury.
Yeah,
Right?
you see, I feel like a lot of people would have been way less mad at Ross if he had just said that. So yeah, the title of this recording is no long. It's now what Ross should have said to Rachel to win her back. That's now the
Yes,
topic.
if they'd come to me, I could have repaired their relationship. But don't they end up together at the end? I can't even remember. Don't they have a kid?
They do end up together. Rachel gets on board the plane. Wait, no, Ross. Wait, I actually don't remember what happened.
I remember that Chandler and what's her name? Courtney Cox. What's her name?
Monica.
Monica. They're
Yeah.
together. Yeah, they're
They are
together. At the end.
together. That's a great couple. One of my favorite couples, on-screen couples ever. Um, I just have to put it out there and like put a disclaimer because that I know I'm close to some off-screen couples in my personal life, and they might watch this and go, "Hey, how dare you? I thought I was a favorite couple."
Oh,
So
okay.
that's just
Yes, just qualifying that we're
yeah,
talking about
saying
fictional
it.
couple.
So apart from what Ross and Rachel went through, what are some emotional challenges that couples might face when trying to go ahead with moving on from infidelity?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what we were just talking about, and I don't want to totally get stuck in friendland, but it goes into, what is real apology and what is real repair. And the person who has done the betraying, it doesn't mean they don't have hurts in the relationship, but in the first stage, they have to really address and be able to take in, if they have remorse, if they have the desire to repair, they have to take in the pain that they caused and be willing to hear for a long time
So
the pain that they caused.
what kind of language would be useful in this scenario when they are trying to make amends?
Well, I think it's to be able to hold. I don't know that I want to script as much as to say that anyone who's trying to get closer to someone has to be able to hold some calm, compassionate curiosity to really want to understand how their partner feels, and to be able to take that in a compassionate way. And I think it's not as much about the words. In fact, sometimes it's less words are better. And, there's cheap apologies that don't really get to the heart of it. It's a repeated stance of being willing to witness in an open-hearted way the pain that I caused you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you have any examples of what a cheap apology would look like versus a real apology?
I'm sorry you were hurt by it.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah, it is a classic. I mean, and people say that about, use that all the time.
Yeah, I just got a bit of a like trauma flashback from that.
Yeah, I mean, we've probably all gotten cheap apologies that make
Yeah,
things feel worse, really. It
yeah,
makes you feel worse.
I think it's excusable when we are younger because we wouldn't have known how else to apologize, and it's something that we just hear sometimes and we repeat it. But I'm sorry, I'm taking the sorry, you were saying.
No. I'm glad you're engaging with it, Marie. It is resonant for so many people. I'm sorry if you felt that way. That's
So, what qualities would make an apology a good apology?
I think the primary factor is that the person who is endeavoring to apologize makes a real effort to understand how their actions affected the person they're apologizing to.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I'm sorry. Could you give us an example, maybe?
you want a good one, not a bad one, right?
Yeah, a good one would be nice.
Um, there are times that I work with. I'm thinking of one where I worked with the woman and the husband had betrayed her, and I worked with the woman alone and helped her deal with her feelings. But I had the sense that what was really impactful for her is that she was clear that her partner really regretted what had happened, really wanted to make their marriage better than it had been, was patient about the process, and was willing to continually come back and understand her hurt and make space for it.
Yeah, that's great. That's so nice to hear. I personally cannot actually envision that myself because, in the past, there was one point in time I was in a relationship. It was a long-term relationship and things went great. And I did propose going to a couples therapist. I thought it would be good for us. And it was just completely shut down. And all these things like, why do you think we need to go to a therapist? Why do you think we need to get people involved? Stuff like that came up. And do you actually have any advice for how someone could answer those questions if something like that comes up?
So the question is, one person wants to go to couples therapy and the other doesn't. Is that the scenario?
Well, yeah, and questions like why do we even need to go to couples therapy? Why do we need to get another person involved? How would the person who wants to bring it to couples therapy, how could that person deal with it?
Huh. This might be an okay time for me to talk about. There's a kind of couples work that I do um, when one partner wants to work on a marriage and the other partner is leaning out, contemplating divorce. And these situations not always have to do with fidelity, but not infrequently do. And it doesn't really work for the person who's motivated to go to couples therapy to drag the other person in.
Mhm.
Because the truth is, even if they go, but they're leaning out of the marriage and are being compliant with going, they get to say, we tried couples therapy and it didn't work. But the truth is, they didn't try couples therapy because they were dragged to couples
Mhm.
therapy.
And
So
emotionally, mentally, they weren't present
they
at
weren't
couples
present. And,
therapy.
and in fact, as a couples therapist, it's a setup, because do you align with the person who's motivated, and then that other person, gets to hold their ambivalence or their negativity about the relationship and not engage in it. And, there is no magic. So essentially there's a kind of work that I do in this space called discernment counseling, where it's a protocol where you get to really, the people come together to the session, but I talk individually to each of them to see if they are willing. And essentially they're discerning between three paths. Path one is leave the relationship, the status quo, they leave the relationship as it is. Path two is separation or divorce. And path three is take the threat of divorce off the table for 6 months and engage in couples therapy with a focus on what you can personally take responsibility for to make the relationship better. So
That's really,
I
yeah.
try whenever possible to not engage with a couple where one person is ambivalent about the relationship or about doing couples therapy, because it is in fact counterproductive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely does make sense. So trust is a crucial element in any romantic relationship. So how can couples work towards rebuilding this trust after infidelity? And what are some signs that trust is being restored in a relationship?
You know, it these gets interesting, especially in this era with like smartphones and you know, do I need you to erase contact? Do I need do I get to now check your phone so that I can have trust? You know, I don't personally have a protocol, but I do think ideally the person who has, if they're motivated to want to rebuild trust with someone, then trying to come up with some transparency and openness to rebuild the trust. I hate, frankly, being put in the position of judging about the ground rules that people want, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But it does tell you something. You know, there was a couple I worked with, and one spouse who had betrayed the truth was that that person was still ambivalent, but the other partner really wanted to repair the marriage and asked for the affair person's contact information to be removed from the phone, which seemed to me to be a very reasonable request. And it was ducked and dodged and not done. But I mean, it tells you something about where the person is. So again, I come back to, I guess your question is more when both people want to rebuild trust, it's that attunement to what does the hurt person need. What can often happen in situations like this is that, if I can use the term hurter and hurtee, the hurter can sometimes have like a shelf life of willingness to try to repair, and then either runs out of patience or gets flooded with their own guilt and shame, and sort of undoes all the knitted stitches and sometimes the person who was hurt keeps sort of tearing at the wound. So, both people have to have an interest in really repairing the injury in a good way. I think about it like a tear in a fabric, and, you can knit the stitches back together. And, they say with a broken bone, the place that it breaks is stronger than the other parts of the bone. I know, and I've seen many couples who've gone through infidelity, trust breaches, and it's made them stronger with one another. And they've grown from it. I've absolutely seen that. I've also seen it be an open wound that opens periodically, even if they do stay together. But it's we talk about trust. I also think there's a kind of there's cheap forgiveness, and then there's genuine forgiveness.
Yes.
Actually, I did bring a book. I brought a lot of books that I use, and this is one that I really, can I show a book?
Yes, of course, please.
Okay, so this is a book called How
How
Can I
Can I
Forgive You?
Forgive You?
Yes, by Janice Abrams Spring. And I actually have it marked for, I've shown this to my clients. So the first chapter is the first section is called Cheap Forgiveness. And that is, I'm so desperate to stay in a relationship with you that it's like, it's fine, Marie. It doesn't matter. It's all good. And I sweep it under the rug and we don't deal with it.
Yeah, I need to get on reading that book because
A very good book.
I'm too good at sweeping things under the rug.
Yeah, that's
And
not the recommended. That's the little first section. But then there's the second section, which is called Refusing to Forgive. You and I can stay in a relationship, but I'm going to stick it. I'm going to get what I want on a million other things and never let this go. I'll put it back in your face forever.
I have a personal question now.
Yeah.
As a therapist, from a therapist perspective, is it okay to have that phase where you just refuse to forgive?
Oh, I mean, we haven't gotten to the really important part, which is that, I mean, you cannot, if the other person isn't working with you, then you can't, you can do cheap forgiveness or refusing to forgive, but if they're not working with you, you can't have genuine forgiveness. And let me explain.
Mm-hmm.
The third section is called acceptance. If you've hurt me and you don't have remorse or you don't want to work on the relationship, you've moved on, I still have an injury from how you've hurt me. And I can do a kind of unburdening of my own pain, which she calls acceptance. I acknowledge how it hurt me. I acknowledge the pain and suffering. I acknowledge that I deserved better than I got. And I acknowledge what happened. And I can have some level of healing. I don't have to just keep nursing my grudge for my own health and my own safety, because we don't have a relationship anymore. And sometimes somebody that hurt us is dead. And then we can't get an apology, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of the book, that much of the book, more than half the book, is about what she calls genuine forgiveness, which is a relational process where it goes back and forth. And even eventually, if I'm the one that betrayed and hurt you and committed the infidelity, at some point, not today, not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but at some point, it would be important for you to understand what was going on with me. What was I so unhappy with what was going on? Were you not listening to me? Had you shut me out? Were you always at work? Was I lonely? What caused me
What
to
the
stray?
context was.
Not that it excuses it,
Mm-hmm.
but that it more completely tells the story of how did this betrayal happen? How did this infidelity happen?
It gives context to the action, the reason behind the action.
Yeah, and in some ways, it can make the forgiveness stronger. If you tell me, Fran, you were working every night and I kept telling you how lonely I was, and I get how wrong it was that I did what I did. And I can say, you know what, Marie, I wasn't listening. I was too busy making podcasts and trying to be a celebrity and I left you alone. And I get that. I mean, I still don't feel good about you, even though we were on a break. You shouldn't have hooked up with Ross.
So apart from going to couples therapy, if both are willing, and forgiveness, genuine forgiveness and genuine apologies, how else can couples support each other in this healing process?
There is a space for coming back to, what are the strong bonding qualities that you do have in a partnership? Because relational repair can be exhausting, and going over these things are exhausting. But, if you like to go dancing, if you like to cook meals together, whatever the strength that you had before can come back. And,
Yeah.
this is another odd one, but sometimes infidelities open up a couple's sexual relationship eventually in a positive way. I don't recommend it as a way to, I don't give it the good housekeeping seal of approval, but
She's
I'm
not
not
saying that if
no,
your
not at all.
relationship is
No,
no longer satisfying you sexually, that you should go and cheat
I did
and
not say that.
come back and it'll be better. That's not what she's saying.
It's not what she's saying. What I'm saying is that sometimes in the nuclear explosion of an infidelity, some dead wood of a relationship gets burned and it ignites a new passion. I don't recommend it, but I've seen it.
Yeah.
I have seen it. And I know that can be the case.
That is strangely beautiful because I don't necessarily condone it either, but it is beautiful that these things kind of just almost solve themselves and makes it better. Well, they don't solve themselves, but it comes out like it arises a beautiful phoenix is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes it does.
We don't always know what's going to be. Well, the phoenix is an interesting metaphor because sometimes there are things that need to be destroyed for some new growth to happen.
Oh my God, that's beautiful.
You're easy, Marie. I think that's what we're saying, right?
That I'm easy?
No. That sometimes it's not entirely clear that something that destroys something isn't in service of creating something new.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to say. But don't try and destroy it to find this beautiful thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually was reading something the other day. There was a recent article in The Atlantic about crushes and how common they are, even in committed relationships, for people to have crushes, and that it can be, and the crush doesn't need to go to an infidelity, but it can invigorate a sense of desire and desirability and enlivening.
Oh, that's interesting. Within the relationship?
Yeah.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there was a really interesting article about crushes and how common they are and how exciting they are for people.
Amazing. So it's actually healthy to have a crush when you're in a relationship but not act on it.
Can be.
Wow. That's given me some perspective. Thank you so much for answering our questions, Fran. Now we're moving on to the open mic. This is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So take it away. The floor is yours.
Okay, I told you I wanted to talk to Australian people about dogs because I have had 4 Australian Labradoodles. which
I love
are
that.
now here called cobber dogs.
Oh,
You know that?
where did they get that name from?
Okay, I was hoping you could tell me, but I'll tell you what I understand. So probably more than 25 years ago, they started in Australia creating what we initially got our dogs 17 years ago. They're called multi-generational Australian Labradoodles, and they mixed both labs and poodles and I think some Cocker Spaniel, and they created this concoction of dog that is incredibly relational, incredibly sweet. They've been my therapy dogs, and they're adorable. And they're hypoallergenic coat like the poodles. And so then in the United States, when we first got the Australian Labradoodles, I mean, they were pretty rare about 17 years ago, but everyone in the United States started mixing everything with poodles. I don't know if that's happening in Australia. So there's everything is a doodle and a poo here. There's cockapoos and Bernedoodles, Bernese mountain dogs and doodles and whatever. So then some of the breeders here decided to call them cobber dogs, which I was told that cobber in New Zealand and Australia means like best friend.
I actually had no idea. I also didn't grow up in Australia. I grew up in Singapore, so I might have a lack of knowledge, but I've never actually heard that before. However, I did just look it up, and apparently the Australian cobber dog is a pure breed, recognized by some organization called the MGBA, and has its own DNA sequence. And it's actually completely different from a Labradoodle, because it's pure. It's a pure breed. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I mean, they were all wolves at one point, right? All dogs,
Yeah.
right. But so anyway, I have my cobber dogs or Australian Labradoodles, and I'm very grateful to the Australians that created my wonderful dogs. So that's what I wanted to
You're
do.
welcome on behalf of the Australians from a non-Australian. Thank you so much for talking to us about your 4 beautiful cobber dogs, Fran. I learned a lot about the healing process of infidelity in a relationship, and cobber dogs as well, which I never knew were a thing.
Now you know they're wonderful. If you're looking for a dog, you should get a cobber dog.
Unfortunately,
and if your partner's betrayed you, you need a cobber dog.
unfortunately,
We'll never betray you.
I do have a cat who functions as a dog, and he might not get along with the dog. He might try and eat the dog because he tries to eat everything. But the good news is that if someone tries to cheat on me, he will also be eating that person. So it's a win-win. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
I do have a website, which I think I gave to the organization. It should get posted with it, drfrandavis.com.
Yeah, drfrandavis.com. We'll link it in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.